I call the Kitty Hawk Town Council to order this Monday, February 4, 2019, at Kitty Hawk Town Hall. It's now 6 p.m. I do apologize for any hoarseness. It's that time of year. I suppose it happens to all of us. Welcome to those that might see us later and anyone who's here tonight. Hi, Donnie. How are you doing? Would you join us for a moment of silence? Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, approval of the agenda. I need to make one slight change here. I want to add under new business 8B some bridge resolutions, basically to support naming the new Oregon Inlet Bridge. All right, do I hear a motion to approve the amended agenda?
So moved.
Does it have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? There are none. All right, presentation. Ken, you're up. Keep in mind, somebody has a pool going on time here.
I might be in on that. Well, I will second your notion of 'tis the season for hoarseness, so I also apologize for any of that, fighting the same thing. All right. Well, the main reason for coming up tonight is to give you an update on the monitoring that we The main thing is to give you an update on the monitoring that we completed. We did the profile surveys back in the summer of 2018, but something that I'll get into a little bit into a little bit more with you is these Nearshore surveys that we followed up and did another survey in October. And so it wasn't really until the beginning of January where we finished up all our analysis and provided the draft report to Andy, and we've gone back and forth a little bit with some comments. The other thing that I'll say up front is that the monitoring report, because the Kitty Hawk and Kill Devil Hills projects are kind of a continuous beast that we're monitoring, it's all one report, so all the Kill Devil Hills information is also in this report. So we've gotten comments back from Kitty Hawk, we're waiting for some comments back from Kill Devil Hills, and then we'll be able to finalize that. But I think we're pretty set with the information that we'll be providing tonight. So just a quick presentation outline, just brief project overview. I want to talk a little bit about a general evaluation. Willie and I went out and looked at the beach today. Just some basic points about that. We'll talk a little bit about the monitoring analysis, both the profile surveys that were conducted back in June and then the nearshore bathymetric surveys that were done in October. We'll talk a little bit about some recommendations, and then the last slide I have is kind of a schedule that puts things into context, always kind of keeping in reference this idea that renourishment that nourishment is kind of a cyclical thing. So talking about some of the things that we'll need to be thinking about over the next several years as we move towards a potential 2022 project. Just a quick background. Again, it's real important for us as consultants to make sure that we're constantly focused on, all right, what was the original goal of this project and how do we measure performance? So since the early part of this project, we established these three goals with the town. That one, we wanted to provide erosion mitigation for any erosion that might be taking out parts of infrastructure in the town, or Highway 12, the roads, any shoreline erosion that could potentially be a vulnerability to the roads and infrastructure. Number two, reducing the flooding that we were seeing, especially between the highways and those residential areas. The project was meant to reduce that flooding. And third, the third goal of it was to reduce the vulnerability of some of the homes, the oceanfront homes that were along the town shoreline. So those are the three things that we look at as we try to evaluate performance. This is just a slide we've shown a number of times. It shows the main overview of the multi-town projects. The project, the Barrow sites offshore where the sand came from, and some of the volumes and distances for the initial project that was built in 2017. Again, this is kind of a zoom-in image of Kitty Hawk. This figure is from the actual monitoring report. It shows all those stations. A lot of the text in the monitoring report talks about individual stations. At times, we'll actually try to refer to different streets, and I've got some notes to try to keep that straight tonight. But if you hear a station or something like that, referring back to these maps is the best way to figure out, all right, well, what are we talking about at station 50 plus 28? We also look at a small section, that 1,500-foot section north of Town Hall, or north of the town boundary, that 1,500-foot section where sand was placed in Southern Shores. And then another 1,000 feet north of that section was more or less where the northern taper was. So sand was really placed 2,500 feet north of the northern town boundary of Kitty Hawk. So just general evaluation, these are some photos that Willie and I took today. As far as evaluating things with those three goals of, are we providing erosion mitigation to the highway, to some of the oceanfront infrastructure? Certainly are. The starter dune seems to be taking off really well. I've got a couple of profiles that we can look at. You can look at all the cross sections in the report that really shows some of that building of that starter dune, how it's gotten wider, how it's gotten higher. Willie's told me that, since the project went in, they haven't had to pump water, but I think he mentioned one time that was really just a rainfall event, not any ocean overwash. So that's great. That's exactly what we're looking for. I was talking to the mayor earlier, and I said it to Willie that, in the back of my mind, success is going to be that when we come back in 2022 and it's time to rebuild that project, that we want to have an established dune out there that we can build off of in 2022 and put back that sacrificial sand that we know is going to get taken up by the ocean over time. But to reestablish a dune in that area and really provide that flooding protection and that erosion mitigation protection, that's really key in measuring that success. So this is another photo just looking from the pier south up at the Hilton. Certainly as you drive up and down the beach, there are some areas where both the berm, kind of the dry sandy area, has some scarping in it. There's also some areas where the front of the dune, where the original sand fence went in, there's a couple spots where there is some scarping. That's sort of natural, when you see the ocean way up against the dune line on a day where the nor'easters are coming through or the wind is blowing pretty hard. That's sort of a natural adjustment of the beach profile of how it's pulling sand and moving sand, spreading it up and down the beach. A lot of times we're seeing that those sort of features smooth out over time as well. So we'll talk a little bit about the details in that monitoring analysis. I showed a similar map to this, but this is the area that's actually being monitored. So obviously we're monitoring all of the Kill Devil Hills project south of here, but in Kitty Hawk we have an area that we call the Kitty Hawk project area, which is just from north boundary to south boundary of the town. We also have an area that we call Southern Shores project area, which is both that 1,500-foot section of Southern Shores where a fill project was put in, and the 1,000-foot taper that was built in Southern Shore. So in the report, you'll hear it referred to as the Southern Shores project area. And then you also see it something called north of the project area. So from station 25 plus 00 up to 50, that 2,500-foot section, it's something that we like to track outside of the project area just to see how sand is spreading up the coast and down the coast. Down in Kill Devil Hills, we actually monitor about 5,000 feet south of their project as well. So it's just something that we do in these monitoring programs that we want to track. We know that sand is spreading laterally off of the project, and we want to try to track that to make sure that we know how the sand is moving in the system. A little bit about how we do these beach profiles. Some of you might have seen this in action, but basically you have two crews. You have a land crew that starts up on the dune, or on the landward side of the dune actually. They've got a GPS survey, RTK GPS, and they just run a line that they can look at their controller, make sure they're online. They go up over the dune, down into the water, and they usually go out as far as they can into the water, because that boat on the right-hand side, it has to run a profile from out in about 30 feet of water on that same line, and the two surveys need to overlap by about 50 feet. So either the boat needs to get really close to shore or the swimmer needs to get pretty far offshore. And so that's sometimes in the summer when we're up here doing that, we always try to make sure that the policemen and the firemen and the ocean rescue know what's going on. They see a boat come in that close to shore, they tend to get a little bit nervous. But that's what's going on. So in a plan view, in a bird's eye view, if we were to plot all of that data, it would basically look like a line of points going from the beach out into the ocean. And if we zoom in, or if we plot that on kind of a graph, you create a cross section. And when we take those profiles, one from before the project and one from after the project, and now that we monitor every year, you stack those on top of each other and you're able to compare and contrast to see where the beach is building up, where the beach is eroding, how the beach compares to what it looked like before the project. So this profile here, I think I think this is Hawk Street right here, so we're just a little bit north of Hawk Street. But if we zoom in the actual report, what we show is kind of a zoom in portion of the beach part of the profile, and then we show the whole entire profile that goes out to about 30 feet of water. So this is the zoomed in profile, and what I want to call your attention to is the blue line is the pre-project profile. So that's where the beach was before the project went in. This black line is where the beach was, at least from -5 feet elevation up, where it was in December of 2017. And the red is where it was in June of 2018. One of the things I want to point out is the starter dune. So this little hump here in the black line would have been the starter dune basically after construction. And what you can see here is that we built up both width and height on that starter dune on this particular profile. All these profiles are in the report as an appendix. You can go through and see which ones have gained, which ones have lost. But the trend is that starter dune certainly has gained some width and gained some elevation. If you were on the ground and you were watching those guys survey, you'd see that the profile kind of runs right between these two houses. This flat area in the profile is actually the road, Highway 12, and then it goes up in elevation a little bit, comes down, and then goes into the starter dune. So, and then there's actually much more detail in the number of points that are on these profiles, but for visual display, we kind of cut down those points and show that on these graphics. So if we were to zoom out, the entire profile would be plotted. It would go way out here offshore. We get out into 30, 35 feet of water, and that's how we measure the volume change all the way out to the -24 foot contour. We call that the depth of closure. So a lot of the numbers that you'll read about in the report talk about out to a depth of -24. That's what we're talking about. All right. A little bit of an overview for the monitoring analysis. The data that we're looking at in this monitoring is we compare the pre-project survey that was done in June 2017, which is the survey that the contractors did. They actually did it every 500 feet, but the monitoring profiles are every 1,000 feet. So we use that June 2017 data, and then you'll remember in December 2017, a few months after the project was completed, we did our first full survey of the area. And so by comparing those two projects, that's kind of our baseline volume of how much sand is in the system. And then after that, we're comparing each year's survey to that baseline volume. So what we're really comparing in this monitoring analysis is the December 2017 survey and the June summer of 2018 survey. Something else I'll talk to you about in just a minute is after we did this initial analysis with these shore perpendicular profiles, we came back and talked about doing some shore parallel bathymetric surveys. I'll show you what that looks like in a different diagram here in a second. Let's see. So we do two different types of analysis. One is a shoreline change, which is basically if we think about where the mean high water line was before the project, where it was after the project. We obviously pushed it back out quite a bit towards the ocean. And then each time we survey it, that mean high water profile moves back a little bit more each time. So we can look at the beach tracking it sort of linearly, or we can look at the beach looking at those cross sections and actually calculate how much volume is in the system or is moving off of the system. All right. So we do both of those in the actual monitoring analysis. All right. So let's talk a little bit about some of the results in the monitoring analysis. When we average all of the profiles together in the Kitty Hawk project area, we come up with an average of that mean high water shoreline contour has moved landward 8.9 feet over the course of the monitoring period from December 2017 to June 2018. That number isn't, knowing that that's right after the project was constructed, that's not an unhealthy number of moving back 8.9 feet. That's pretty reasonable. But one of the things that you'll see if you look through that monitoring report is that it's highly variable. So in some of the parts of the beach, down around Kitty Hawk Road, that was like the last section of beach that was built. So if you'll remember, we started building the Kitty Hawk project back in June of 2017. September was a really stormy month, and then we finished it up in October. So the profiles that were built before September had already had a lot of sand move offshore. And if you look at the results of the shoreline change analysis, you'll see that there wasn't a whole lot of change in that shoreline on the parts of the beach that were built before September, but the ones that were built after September, where the beach was still really, really wide in December, those are the ones that you see a lot of pullback. So it's really that equilibration process that we talk a lot about leading up to the project. But there's a lot of variability in those charts if you take a look at it. The real thing that we want to concentrate on, though, is this volume change in the project area. So I talked about comparing the before and the after to figure out how much volume was added to the system. So when we do those two surveys, we find that about 2.12 million cubic yards of sand was added to the system between the northern town boundary and the southern town boundary. All right? When we went in and did the June 2018 survey, we did these 1,000-foot profile surveys. We do the same type of evaluation calculation, and the numbers are showing that about 587,000 cubic yards of sand, or almost 28% of that volume that was placed, we were measuring a loss of that much volume. Now that's a big number. That's a number that makes our eyes pop out and say, you know, let's check our data. Is something going on here? Is this right? So we went back, we performed all the QA/QC, checked to make sure all the survey data was accurate. Everything appeared to be accurate. So what we did was, let's see here, and I'll start jumping around a little bit. Again, one of the things with this volume change is that it is variable. So we can give you an average of what it did over the whole course of the area, but these three bullets that I've got down at the bottom, where it says basically in the northern 5,000 feet of beach, if you do that profile to profile calculation, it actually says we gained about 8,000 cubic yards of sand in that one area. If you go from station 5028 down to 16970, 16970 is down near White Street, and I think 5028 is between Luke and Exner Street. So if you can kind of envision that section, we're talking about a little over 10,000 feet of beach, lost about 400,000 cubic yards in that section. That's, again, a big number. But the biggest number was at the very southern section, in a very small area between basically White Street and the southern end of the project area, was showing a loss of about 200,000 cubic yards of volume, which are just huge numbers. It's almost more sand than was actually placed. So when we look at this graph, the red bars on the top is showing each profile how much volume was placed during the project. And the green bars are showing the volume change we see over the first 6 months from December to June. So one of the things that jumps out at us is this profile, this individual profile, 189.87. It looks like that green bar is as big as the amount of sand that was actually placed during the project. But we can go out to that area today and look at that area and say, clearly we haven't lost all of the sand on that profile. Something's going on. And we can look in other places and see how the beach has actually widened. We can look at that shoreline change and say, the shoreline change says we've only moved back 8.9 feet over the whole course of it. So what's going on? So we want to point you to the offshore bathymetric data. So during the project, one of the things that was brought to our attention by the dredgers, we were actually in their office one day and they were showing us a survey chart that just had contours on their wall of a survey that they had done before the project started, because they were trying to figure out where were the areas along the beach that they could get their dredge closest to shore so that they had a shorter pumping distance to get the sand off of the boat. And we saw these contours where, you know, the 30-foot contour comes way in close to the beach and then it goes back offshore. And we said, you know, what are those contours? And they told us they had run this multi-beam survey out there. We said, can we get a copy of it? And so we started digging in. There have been some other papers that have been written by some folks at the FRF. We actually got some data that was collected by the FRF back in 2009. So we had 2 of these surveys, and we started looking at how these features sort of migrate down the beach over a long period of time. Over the course of about 9 years, these features migrated about 2,000 feet. And it really, the one around Kitty Hawk Road correlates pretty well to the hotspot that you all were experiencing leading up to the project. So at the end of the project in 2017, we asked the town if we could go out and survey this area so that we had a baseline survey to compare future surveys to. Well, after we got these results back in the summer of last year that showed these high erosion areas, we started looking at what profiles fell in the vicinity of these unusual features offshore. And what we find is, of just looking at these 5 profiles that fall within these unusual contour areas offshore of Kitty Hawk, that accounted for about 60% of the volume change that we were computing by just doing this profile by profile volume comparison. So very quickly it was obvious that there was a correlation between how a profile lines up on these unusual, we call them depressions or troughs in the offshore. And if you can imagine this hole is kind of migrating down the beach, you may survey at one point in time and be right on the edge. Like, let's take this profile for example. You may be right on the edge of where the hole is actually kind of shallow. But if this thing continues to migrate down, the next survey is going to fall right in the middle of that hole, and it's going to look like there's a huge volume loss on that one individual profile, when really it's not reflecting of how the beach is performing. And so what we concluded is that's more or less what's going on. We ended up doing a complete survey of that area, all the way up from 5,000 feet north of Kitty Hawk, all the way through all of Kill Devil Hills. So in future surveys, we now have this entire nearshore survey to compare and contrast to. So I talked about previously, we were running these shore perpendicular lines. I showed you those profile lines. This survey is run with a boat that's running parallel to shore at 200-foot space lines. So we have a much higher data density to be able to resolve. Basically, I was explaining it to Andy that, you know, if we were trying to survey this table here, if we ran one profile on this side of the table and one profile on the other side of the table, if we assume it's flat, we'd get a good area of that table. But if there was a hole in the middle of that table and we ran one profile on one side and one on the other, we would never know it. And so now we're running closely spaced lines down the table this way to make sure that we can resolve those holes that are out there and better understand how the sand is moving around in that area. So this is kind of a conclusion side as far as this nearshore bathymetric survey. So we've done this nearshore survey. So what have we learned from this survey? Well, the October 2018 survey now provides a project-wide baseline data set. We were able to do some small comparisons. That survey, the first survey that I showed you, the one that we did right after the project ended in December 2017, February 2018, only covered a small subsect of the Kitty Hawk project because it was the area that we had previous data in. But now we have full coverage of the whole project area. So in the summer of 2019, we can compare a new survey to that old survey that covers the whole entire town, and we can better resolve what's the actual volume change that's going on along the town shoreline. One of the exercises that we went through to kind of, play this out and make sure that this was a worthwhile exercise, that there was some merit in trying to figure out with the data, with the limited data that we had, whether or not there was a difference in these profile surveys versus the nearshore bathymetric surveys. We did compare and contrast using in the area where we have both the nearshore bathymetric surveys and the beach profile surveys. We compared the two methods, and we found that by using the beach profile surveys only, that yielded about a 32% higher volume loss than if we actually used the more dense data coverage and actually look what was going on between those two profiles. So that's written up in the report. You can read a little bit more detail there, but there's some good supporting evidence that says, you know, we're not losing the volume of sand that those beach profiles show that we're losing. And certainly, you know, going up and down the beach and looking at the beach, giving it the eye test, we're certainly not losing, 27% of the volume of sand that was put on that beach. So it's a little bit different. It's not something that I personally had seen before in a beach nourishment project. I've talked to a lot of the ladies and gentlemen that work at our larger offices that have a lot more gray hair than I, or a lot less hair than I, and no one's really seen anything like this before. I think somebody had mentioned a couple of features similar to this off of Long Island in New York, but it's an unusual scenario to see that deviation of those contours that stretch all the way out into 45 feet of water and come into 15 or 20 feet of water. So just intuitively, you would expect that, as waves come through those areas and refract, that there's probably some wave focusing that will create some hotspot areas in the beach nourishment project. We just want to make sure that we have an accurate way of tracking the volume that's actually being lost off of the project, so that we can, we can accurately evaluate the performance of the project and plan accordingly for the next project in potentially 2022. We concluded that the shore parallel surveys are a better method for resolving these changes due to the presence of the nearshore depressions. And we recommend that in the future, we not only do those 1,000-foot profiles, but we also duplicate that shore parallel survey that I talked about. This is a graphic that's also in the report. It basically shows a change plot. So this is the area where we have data. We actually have 2 surveys that have been done by our group. The green areas are areas where you've gained elevation in the offshore, and the tan to orange colors are the areas where you've lost elevation in the offshore. So it just shows how really those patterns indicate that these features continue to migrate what seems like to the south. And the green areas are basically where it was deep, and as this thing migrates south, it's filling in. The brown shaded, tan shaded areas show where it was previously shallow, and now it's a little deeper. All right, final slide, the schedule that I talked a little bit about. So one of the things, you might have read an article last week about Southern Shores is talking a little bit about getting involved in Beach Nourishment Project. We're the firm that's been talking to them a little bit. Leading up to this project, the mayor will tell you there was a lot of coordination between the towns in Dare County as well as the county itself. Even towns like Southern Shores that weren't originally involved in the project and Nags Head were involved in these discussions sort of 2 or 3 times a year. We'd get together and talk about the progress of how this permitting was going, what the new project costs were going to be, how this might affect other things that other towns were trying to do. But it really turned out to be a huge success. But one of the things that we're proposing is probably sometime in April, holding another one of these multi-town project meetings, just to talk to everybody about the potential of Southern Shores coming in. Let the county tell the towns anything they have, concerns or thoughts about, updates to their cost model. I know they're constantly looking at the numbers of revenue that they're generating with the room occupancy tax. So just getting everybody back on the same page in April of this year. The next annual monitoring survey would be done in June 2019 to try to fall as close to a 1-year interval as possible of when the 2018 survey was done. And then looking at, when we finished that study for Southern Shores, we generated a project schedule really for them to get their permits in place. But it highlighted a few things that, a few dates that would really fall into place for all of the towns. So probably around February 2020, we would hold an interagency meeting with the resource agencies to let them know that we'd probably be pursuing a permit for Southern Shores, find out if they, what sort of permit modifications might be required for a potential Kitty Hawk, Kill Devil Hills, and Duck project in 2022. So that'll be something that we'll look forward to. There may be some borrow area development refinements. Those we would want to try to do between April 2020 and February 2021. This is all working towards making sure that we can bid the project out sometime in the summer of 2021. So we're looking at trying to put bids out on the street between June 2021 and August 2021, so that we can build a project, the same sort of construction schedule we had in 2017, looking at sometime between May and October of 2022 as the next potential re-nourishment project. This schedule isn't in the actual monitoring report, but I wanted to put it somewhere where you guys could kind of take a look at that, digest it at your own speed, and I'd be more than happy to take any questions that you have.
So the beach along here is different from anything that you or other people in your business have seen before.
That's correct. I've talked to the guy that did the Nags Head project, their main project engineer and the president of their company, Tim Khanna. I'm sure you know Tim, Coastal Science and Engineering. They mentioned that they've seen a couple of these features, similar features, down in Nags Head, especially down in the southern part of Nags Head, and they've tried different things to try to resolve how you accurately track the volume change when clearly it's something that's going on in the offshore portion. I mean, the idea of measuring out to that deep of water is really that deeper water acts like a foundation of the beach. So we're seeing this beach and this dune up here, but in order for it to hold its angle of repose, there has to be sand here that's holding it in place. And if this sand erodes away, then this is going to start crumbling in. And so you always want to maintain a good foundation out there. But is there something in the underlying geology that allows, these features to hold a steeper slope? The sediment, the grain size, the grain characteristics of the sediment can allow it to hold a coarser or a steeper slope. It's just, typically you would survey all the way out to these depths of closures, but when we go that far offshore, we're seeing these unusual changes that are sending the numbers all over the place. One of the things that they recommended was doing beach profiles every 500 feet instead of every 1,000 feet, which would basically double the cost of the survey. And I personally, I think that running those shore parallel lines, it's less than doubling the cost. It's a little more cost efficient to do it that way. And even at 500-foot spacing, we're still, if you use that table analogy, now we've just put one more line in the middle of that table, we could still be missing things on that table. So I think this shore parallel method of surveying is a better way of doing it, getting better resolution. And if we do see some real volume changes that we feel are indicative of places where the beach isn't performing as well, we'll look at that and come back with some recommendations of, is there modeling that could be done to look at this. But again, you and I have talked about this of, what do you do about a big hole offshore? You're not going to go put 8 million cubic yards of sand into a big hole offshore to try to fill it in. How do you deal with it? Is there something you can predict how these things are moving or how fast they're moving, so that we sort of stack a little bit more sand in areas that we think are going to be more impacted by those features as waves refract around them? Or is there something else? Is there some other structural alternative that needs to be looked at to try to augment the performance of just placing sand? So.
And a gravel beach is more susceptible to this erosion than a sand beach?
In theory, the gravel beach is going to hold a steeper slope. The coarser the grain size, the coarser the slope that you can hold. I'm not sure what to say other than...
Well, the reason I asked the question is the holes that you're showing. Can you go back to this slide? The holes that you're showing have been known by people like us that have lived here all our lives to have a high content of gravel.
Okay.
And even after the beach renourishment, gravel came back in plenty. So we've always been told that had some sort of a impact onto it. The other thing I would point out, and this is for consumption, those holes that you're seeing, you're calculating for how much sand you've kept or lost, one way or the other.
That's right.
And you're averaging that out. To us, the lay people in our beach nourishment, we see what we see above the water. We also know those holes, at those holes, when we have a high storm, now we don't have an offshore bar to make a difference, and those holes are where we'll have the high rate of erosion and loss of a dune if we need to. So for the people that are watching this later, just pay attention to what you're seeing here, because what you're looking at is where the next erosion will
The
be
hot
the
spot.
highest.
Yep.
All right. Folks, anybody else? Okay, the only other question I have then is, in the October when you did surveys at 100 feet,
200 feet.
200 feet, perpendicular or parallel?
Parallel to shore.
All you did was parallel, not perpendicular?
Correct. Then they go from about, I don't know how many lines there are. It goes from about 30 feet of water, I think it's about 3,000 feet wide is the section that we surveyed, but we try to get into the minus 10-foot contour and then go out as far as about 3,000 feet offshore.
Okay, and we can expect, because of our beach characteristics, that that's going to be the normal requirement for monitoring.
Yes, and that's what we're recommending for Kill Double Hills as well. And it's also, because there's like 2 or 3 of these features offshore of Kill Double Hills as well. And the original studies that pointed these, that identified these features was done off of duck. We don't, the data that we evaluated at duck is a little bit more typical of what we'd expect, but we are recommending that they at least do one of these baseline surveys so they can see if there's anything out there that they want to be tracking in the future. But for all 3 towns, that's what we're recommending at this point.
Okay. No one else?
No, sir.
All right, thank you, Ken.
All right,
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, next is public comment. Anyone here want to speak? Is anyone here? All right, you do? Come on up.
First, I'd like to thank all of you once again for how far we've come along with the beach nourishment and everything. You know, all the work that led up to it and everything that we're working with now to monitor the progress is just extremely important for our area, and I recognize that and I appreciate it. I also appreciate the help that I've been getting from especially Willie Midget and Ben Alexander and kind of some of the projects that I've been involved in through Better Beaches OBX. You've added the sand fence, you've done, you've contracted some beach planting, and you've also helped us by providing some beach grass to allow us to do some experimental planting and some additional planting to help bolster some of the areas, that we've even looked at here that might be more troublesome areas, and see how that works. It's allowed us to work with a lot of individuals in town too, which is great. Certain homeowners that have always been concerned about, what's happening outside of their homes. And basically, to look at the progress as far as Better Beaches is concerned, we've been able to help expand the dune line around Kitty Hawk Road to about 30 feet in width. And that's about a 2,000 foot linear area that we've been working on. Half of it was planted in one 10-foot deep area by the professionals, and the rest of it's pretty much been planted by us with help from the town. We've also done 600 linear feet or so around Eckner Street, 400 linear feet around Luke Street, and a couple miscellaneous areas where homeowners contacted us and asked us to do some things. It's just hard to cover 3.6 miles, especially when everybody has other things going on. we've noticed that most of the areas where there's sea oats and some miscellaneous scrub left performed pretty well, obviously, because again, like the holes you see there, those are areas that are used to being a little bit more healthy. Upon adding our grass as it advances, but one thing we've pretty much come to realize, and this is through a lot of our work in Nag's Head too, is that original sea oats and scrub kind of holds the line, or even, the sea oats seem to just blow west, and just keep on migrating inland. It's a lot harder for those to expand as vigorously as beach grass going east. So, the goal, I guess, in the future, especially after the next nourishment, would be to have more beach grass, kind of maybe at least 10 feet everywhere in front of these sea oats and in front of houses, or, whatever we can try to hold on to. It was a real triumph for us in the Kitty Hawk Road area when we had that massive storm last March, kind of came close to rivaling the Halloween storm or the perfect storm with the size of the waves and the wave period. And luckily, it came just within a couple tens of feet of wiping out our beach grass, and in some ways lapping over it. But in a lot of those cases, even where it came a little closer up near the pier, it kind of filled in those areas with sand, and the beach grass is starting now to come up through, areas that we thought we lost completely. We also would like to come back through in some of those areas and add the sea oats because they just provide a more active dune, with everything else, having nice varied vegetation. And then we've been looking at, in the areas that we're working on, we got a hold of coastal management and looked at some old imagery they have on the site. I think the only accurate one that we could really find, at least delving into it lightly, was from 2010. But assuming that this grass that we put in and these dunes that we're building maintain and build through the spring and summer, we'll have a significant improvement in the dune line in almost a decade from 2010. We looked at the pictures and used the measuring tool to see how wide they were and such. In some cases, a little bit south of Kitty Hawk Road, there was a dune that was as big as 60 feet wide. We want to look at that and see where it is now. But as far as like right at Kitty Hawk Road, the Black Pelican areas like that, we were at 30 feet or 40 feet 10 years ago. So if we can get just a little bit beyond that, we might have something that can handle the volume of storms that we did have from Sandy to 2016. We have a list of about 150 volunteers so far that have actually been out there and stuck their hands in the sand. And we've had as many as 50 working at one time. It was a little overwhelming, but it worked. And the roster's growing, and some people love it. They're having a good time. We also got in touch with the people who are running the Nearshore project from the Coastal Federation, and we're hoping to provide them with at least as many volunteers as they need. They said, 10 would be wonderful, and we feel like 10 will be pretty easy. Get them out there. We've already kind of locked in some of the people that have been out with us more that can help with that project. So we're pretty excited to be able to do all this, and it's due to an effort that we're being supported by you on, and I really appreciate it.
All right. And we appreciate the fact that you do take that on. Volunteer efforts, just like in firefighting and others, is important. There's only so much the local government can do with the tax dollars we get. So that volunteer extra effort is very much needed, and we thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Let the record show no one else came forward. Consent agenda. Do I hear a motion to approve the consent agenda? Motion to approve. Does it have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? There are none. All right, and there are none removed. New business, Kitty Hawk Recreation Committee liaison. Jeff is ready to give it up, and Tina Tice has indicated a desire that she would take it on. Do you hear a motion to,
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion to appoint Tina Tice as the Kitty Hawk Recreation Committee liaison.
I'll second.
all right. Yes, you did. Didn't take long to get that second, did it? All right. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? There are none. You got it, Tina. I know you'll do a good job.
Thank you, Tina.
Thank you, Tina.
All right. And the next thing is, this came to me late. I got a call late Friday indicating that the towns and the county, of course, are lining up to maybe put in their input for naming the new bridge across Oregon Inlet, and in some ways keeping the piece of the old bridge to its true name. So what I'm going to do is make a motion. You have a proposed resolution. It's actually from Kill Devil Hills, but I would suggest and make a motion that we approve a resolution recommending the replacement for the Herbert C. Bonner Bridge to be named in honor of Mark Bass Knight. And the second one is a resolution requesting the Herbert C. Bonner be retained as the name of the remaining portions of the first bridge across Oregon Inlet, and be supportive of the other towns. And frankly, Mark has not only done a lot for northeastern North Carolina and North Carolina in general, but he did an awful lot for Kitty Hawk. Every time we had a storm, the road get tore up, he was Johnny on the spot. He was giving us sources, money, whatever, get the state moving. The flood control that we have done as far as the standpipes, that started with a flood study, basically, of between the highways. And he initiated that, got the state to come in $5,000 on that. And he just, all those kind of things. This is a fitting tribute to him as far as I'm concerned. So the motion is on the table to use this as our guide and do a resolution. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
All right, we have a second.
All of us.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? There are none. Okay. Mr. Town Manager.
Thank you, good evening. The only announcement I have is we launched our new website last Friday, and you'll see that on the TV screens in front of you there. I'd like to recognize the committee that was formed to help create this website. We used a member from each of our departments, and on the committee was Ben Alexander from the Building Department, Lynn Morris from the Clerk's Office, Liliana Noble from the Finance Department, Mike Bassalone from Fire, Sharon Davenport from the Police Department, Jamie Ewers from Public Works, and Melody Clumpton from Human Resources. So if you see any issues, this is just the general format and the layout. And Melody, do you want to come up and just give them a little idea of what we've done a little bit differently with the tabs and things?
Just twice in like 2 weeks.
Yeah. But
And neither one of them were planned.
Well, as Andy said, this is the new platform for the website. And we are hoping, and I think already, that it allows people, visitors, residents, employees to access information more quickly. There are some things that we still need to update and rearrange, and we are going through testing links and that kind of stuff as well. But at the top is going to be our most important news or what have you. We can change that color. We can also make it running if we're in a state of emergency. Right now we have large item pickup up there, and I hope this works. You can learn more, and you can see what all is going to be collected and that kind of thing. The other cool thing is this side over here to the right always stays the same. So you have your quick links, which are trash and recycling, and we try to look at the most common questions, and trash and recycling, beach information, the town code, and parks and bike paths. We also have the town calendar, and then also contact information. if you go back to the home page, on the bottom, you'll see again the quick links, how to contact us, our latest news, and then also a really nice version of a calendar that we can add things. And you'll see the upcoming things for the month there. You can click view all events, no matter how you like to see things. If you like to see things in a pretty picture, or if you like to see things in a list, or however you like to see things, you should be able to have your preference in this new website. Any questions?
Looks great. The code section, is it easier to navigate than it used to be?
Well, we specifically have a quick link for the code.
Right.
So that will be there all the time. And what it does is these are the ordinances that have not been codified. And you just click on this link and it goes to our Kitty Hawk code.
Good. Yeah, that was a little bit hard to find before. And that was one of the complaint areas, so that's good.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
How do you get to the zoning map quickly? Is there a quick link on it?
I just lost it. Excuse me. There's not a quick link for the zoning map. However, it is under one of the menus, under business, town zoning
It's under
map.
business, okay.
I think it's under both. Some links are under both, aren't they? Business and
Probably.
government, yeah.
And as we go through this, we can try to make it even more accessible. Here's your page. Here's your nice new picture.
That's a good place to leave it.
There you go. All right.
Thank you.
Melody.
Thank you.
But yeah, we appreciate the town council's support on that. I think it was time to kind of give our website a facelift. I also put before you at our capital workshop last month, the question the mayor brought up the question of the original stormwater tax and those funds that we kind of rolled into the beach nourishment project. If you'll look at the very top there at the fiscal year 2015, there was $224,000 and the 4-cent, I believe it was a 4-cent town-wide stormwater, basically, tax. So those funds were rolled into the beach nourishment, and what this list does is kind of give the council a update of kind of where we sit in the beach nourishment fund. As you know, all the monies generated from the MSD, the beach nourishment tax, have to be utilized on beach nourishment. So what Liliana has done is kind of went out to fiscal year 2022 there at the bottom row, and she has kind of projected the debt service. So at the end of 2022, our debt service will be paid. And the remaining balance I highlighted in yellow, so there'll be an estimated about $296,000 left in the fund for beach nourishment. But the mayor has mentioned at the capital projects workshop that maybe we would be able to utilize some of that money for some pumps or a pump. So we wanted to get a good breakdown to make sure there was enough in the fund so we could pay our debt service for the original project. And there is funds available to do that as of now, so.
And let's be clear, I'll make sure everybody understands, the MSD cannot be touched for anything like I suggested. But we had already set 2 cents aside and we rolled it in to another 2 cents. But that does not take into account, or it does not interfere with the obligation we made for beach nourishment on the town-wide portion and the MSD portion. That was in addition to, right?
The town started, the balance was $224,000 back in 2015. That was a totally separate tax.
Right.
We've just always included in our beach nourishment calculations.
Right.
So we can spend 224 out of the remaining 296, and that would be the most we'll be able to
And we wouldn't be touching anything towards the beach nourishment
related to beach
fund.
nourishment. That's
I just want to
correct.
make sure everybody's clear on that.
Yep, no.
Because we had separate things going on, we rolled it in, sometimes it gets lost in the shuffle. But we have some money that we can use, it won't come out of ad valorem tax, essentially, We already had that for something, well, it is, but it's for something else. All right, so
think
we
there-
could buy a pump.
Yeah, and the original reason we did that was to try to make the MSD as little as possible and still fund the project, and then, but our project came in a little bit under budget when we went out for the second bid. So that's really why that money's still available there, and we just basically won't be using it, so.
All right, everybody good with that?
Yes,
So maybe a pump this year, perhaps one next year.
that's
We
great.
can work it in?
Try and give it a shot.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate you doing that. Sometimes it gets confusing, especially when things get rolled into other things. I don't think attorneys are allowed to commingle, is that the term?
That is correct. Got to keep those funds separate.
All right. Well, you're up, Mr. Commingle.
As much as I use this website, I am glad to see this as well. That looks more easily accessible, to say the least. So, looks good. I like it. That's about it.
All right. Town council. Anybody?
I'd like to give the report from the Recreation Committee meeting, which was held on January 29th. I'd like to give a big thank you to Christine Buckner, Rita Phyllis, Paul Enriquez, Tom Hefner, and Linda Barnhart for their dedication and efforts that they put into the Recreation Committee. These volunteers do a great job. We did have someone speak at public comment, and that was Shelby Hines, and he brought forth an excellent suggestion about creating educational markers for historic spots throughout the town. Some of the places he mentioned, which quite honestly I have to say, I've never heard of before and knew nothing of. Only one that knew, I think, was Jeff. Devil Oak Hill, Sound Landing, Duck Pond Bridge, Signpost Road, Kahuki Church, and a location on the Sound side where the Wright brothers came ashore. All members of the committee agreed that this is a great idea to help educate and preserve the heritage of Kitty Hawk and should be pursued. Possibly some members of the committee could work with staff to interview and record Mr. Hines, or anyone else for that matter who may have additional information to document this invaluable information. They felt that these signs would be a great thing, especially for the younger generations coming along that don't know our history, and since we don't have Heritage Day anymore, would keep with that information. One of the members did contact me after the meeting, and which was Rita. She said she had checked with NCDOT to see if they had any funding or information available about historical markers, and she thought that it would be difficult for us to pull this off. And that possibly, I guess what I'd like to see is if the council feels it's something that the staff should pursue.
The difficulty is not in the stories or what he's telling us. The difficulty would be in placing a sign on what is now private property and things of that nature. So I think what I'm going to suggest is, council, let's think about this a little bit and maybe come back with an answer for you, perhaps at the next meeting, or we can get with you individually on thoughts.
Sure.
Because when it first came up, I was aware that it was coming up, because Shelby caught me on the road and laid on to me. I knew then that trying to place markers in the places that he was talking about, for example, the old Loki track he's talking about would be right in the middle of Inez Corner. And that's right now about to be, somebody's trying to build on it. It used to be a house there. So that's the difficulty I see in doing something like that. Not that, now interviewing Shelby would be entertaining. There's no question about that.
Oh, yeah.
But let's think about it, all right? And we'll get back to you
Well, and you know,
one-on-one.
another suggestion, just in looking at the website and thinking about it, even if it's something that we may want to add as a historical feature to the website, if it's not necessarily, marked, it could be on some type of map, a heritage icon or something
Yeah,
on the
that-
website.
yeah, that makes sense.
That might
Makes
be
sense.
easier as like an educational tool
Sure.
And then you could have a paragraph.
on what each.
That would be
And like
very-
what we had mentioned earlier is we may have to pool some other folks so we can get a couple of versions of the story to make sure that they're all similar, since we're finding that may not be the
He does
case.
embellish, yes.
We also had a few minor suggestions for Sandy Run Park, Paul Pruitt Park, and checking for bike racks at beach accesses, and the chairwoman Buckner is going to discuss these items with Willie at Public Works. They suggested regarding the Living Shoreline project on Nearshore Road, actually Tom brought this up, was to consider an informational sign that could educate citizens and visitors about the ongoing project. It seems that a lot of folks drive by or look at it and wonder what it is, since it's a crooked bulkhead out there and they don't understand it.
That's already in the process.
Okay.
That's,
That must have been before me, so.
Yeah, it was.
Okay,
And
great.
that's already a part of the project.
Great.
And that's the whole purpose of the project, and as far as Coastal Federation is concerned. So it's very important to them that the public know
Yes.
what they're doing.
Yeah, and it was mentioned that, I guess, a piece of the town-owned property there that has a bench, maybe that might be the good place to put the sign.
Well, again, let's let them get through the project
Sure.
first and see what they put up, and then if we need to add more, we can do that.
Sure. The guide to Kitty Hawk document has been completed, and I spoke with Sandy at Town Hall about it, who indicated that a PDF file would be put on the new town website that people could print out or view, that's going to have beach access points, boat ramps, other points of interest. They talked about printing it out, but I think the cost is prohibitive because it's a big document, both sided and colored. So in this day and age, I know for folks like myself, old timers, we're used to paper, but newer generation is just going to pull their smartphone up and Google it. So this way, if they Google it, it's going to be able to come up to the town site and they can view it on their phone or electronic device. The committee is also working with staff on the master plan for recreation for the town. A big thank you to Paul Enriquez for all his work on this project and reviewing the master plan for the state and with Andy. Any changes or revisions to the finalized plan that we've all received in the last week are going to be discussed at the next meeting, which is February 25th. That's all I have.
Thank you. Jeff?
I don't have anything tonight.
Lynn?
I don't have anything other than I have been out on the website, and it's nice and clean. And one of the things I started to look for was the zoning map, because I had a question, but then I realized that I had saved it somewhere, so I went to my saved location, because I was short time. But I think it's going to be great for folks. I think all we have to do is get used to it. It's certainly cleaner looking, but thank you all for that work.
Andy, thank you for the luncheon you held recently at the Sandy Run Park, the new equipment. And that was nice. The hot dogs were great. At last count, you had 6, I think. That was great for everybody that came out, had a good time. Was it 6 or 7?
Say that again. I was thinking about the hot dogs.
Okay, that was a nice little get-together right there, I agree. And the park came along nice, and it was an improvement over things that weren't being used. I do have a question for you, Andy, and that is, we're talking about parks. Where are we at with the access from Kitty Hawk Park to the
Yeah,
conservation?
Willie and I, about 3 weeks, maybe 2 weeks back now, we actually walked through. I walked in from the Kitty Hawk Estates and walked back through there, and Willie and I, it's about probably about 300 feet of water that you've got to cross to get to that path. The path's fairly open all the way back out, the 1.8 miles back to Kitty Hawk Estates. I talked to John DeLucia. We're working out some things on his proposal, and that's kind of where we're at. John's going to kind of give us an idea of the basics that need to be done in order for us to go ahead and build that. I just told him we'll probably handle that in the house, being that it's the bidding and probably the project oversight. But the only thing we need to do, I believe, is get the Army Corps engineers approval. So there's no CAMA involvement or anything. So it should be a fairly simple process once I get some plans
Okay.
and they get an opportunity to kind of survey where that's going to be. So
Do you think you'll have
I think in the
Maybe
next,
that thing before summer?
yeah, I'll have it, something probably by our next meeting.
Oh, good.
Yeah, that's
All right.
my intentions,
Good,
Good, thank you.
so.
all right. All right. Public comment? Anybody? Let the record show no one came forward. I motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None.